Good afternoon, everybody. We have a very interesting panel with a huge participation, not just in the audience, but also on the panel. And that makes things both interesting but difficult to manage. I hope this is an appeal to the participants to make their interventions short, sharp, to the point. I will not read their biographies. I will very briefly simply mention who is on the panel. And I will do it not in some kind of protocol, but in the order they appear on my list. Odeta Barbullushi, who is State Secretary, Minister of Foreign Affairs in Republic of Albania. Dragoljuba Benčina, who is State Secretary, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Slovenia. Mr. Igor Crnadak, who I had just met, who is the Foreign Affairs Minister of Bosnia. Mr. Harlem Désir, who is sitting on the right wing of the spectrum, which has nothing to do with the political affiliation of the minister, and he's Minister for European Affairs of France. We have Ambassador Murat Salim Esenli, who is Undersecretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Turkey, who is sitting on the right. Daniel Mitov, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Republic of Bulgaria. Is he here? Yes, he is right here. And Mr. Nikola Poposki. Yes, he is here. He's a former student of mine. I should have recognized him. But he was the last one to turn up. So welcome. Mr. Michael Roth, who is Minister of State for Europe in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Germany. Péter Szijjártó, who is Minister of Foreign Affairs for Foreign Trade of Hungary, and he's here. And Hoyt Brian Yee, who is Deputy Assistant Secretary of the US Department of State, and he's over there. Well, this was a long list. Welcome all of you. And again, the long list means a renewed appeal for concise responses. Just a quick word about where we are at and the themes we might want to discuss. We are 20 years after the war in Bosnia, 15 years after Kosovo. And the agenda in the Balkans overall has moved from security-dominated issues to concerns about state building and the agenda of European integration. The agreement signed last week on the eve of the Vienna summit about Europe and the Balkans are, I think, a good illustration of the kind of changes we have witnessed. However, this positive development should not obscure the unfinished business we still have in the region. There is potential for tension, unresolved issue, setbacks. I won't go through the whole list of it, but you know it as well as I do. The Macedonian internal crisis, the stalemate in Bosnia. Look at the public opinion poll that Regional Cooperation Council has produced recently, and which I highly recommend. If you want to see what is on the minds of the people in the region, you may want to look there, and you see that economic, social, and other concerns are of crucial importance. The distance, the gulf with the elites is something that may be of concern for the democratic developments. The Balkans are in search of stability in an international environment that is far from stable. Two issues that I think will come up and that we should probably discuss. The first is the impact of the simultaneous implosion of the two neighborhoods, South and East. Europe's neighborhood is challenging the EU, but it has an impact in the region. Those who thought that maybe the Balkan question will be eclipsed by what is happening in the neighborhoods, well, think twice, because the migration wave was, of course, a reminder to everybody about the connection between the two, the Balkans as a source of migration and as a transit route for migration. And the second one is a changing role of international players in the region. Changing role in the US, which is quite different from what it was with the engagement, the primary engagement of the US in the 1990s, the role of Russia, the engagement particularly on issues such as energy, Turkey, and of course other players such as China or the Islamic states. So we have there a changing role of international actors in the region. And this leaves us with a long list of questions, which I will simply mention for our future reference. What is the interplay between the internal dynamics and the international, changing international environment? What role of the international actors of the countries that are represented on the panel on this particular interplay? Which way will energy routes go? That is one of the strategic questions concerning the Balkans, especially after South Stream has been shelved. And, last week I was in Vienna, where Prime Minister Edi Rama and Vučić stressed how important to have concrete projects. And Mr. Vučić added, we are not interested in EU money. Well, maybe not, but somebody has to get engaged in those projects and also finance them. So who can that be? Last but not least, the European engagement in the Balkans has been, of course, a long-standing affair, but the recent interest has been renewed at a summit in Berlin a year ago, followed last week in Vienna, and there is next year a plan to follow up in Paris. So these are some of the questions that we want to ask. I will first start with the internal regional dynamics and perhaps turn to those in the region who would want to address how they see the risks, the problems affecting the region, especially with the changing international environment. And then we move on to the other questions that I have referred to. So where do you see the vulnerabilities, the problems, the issues? I have here the representative from Macedonia. There's great concern now that Macedonia, which had avoided conflict in the 1990s, may be witnessing an internal crisis, a political crisis. What is your understanding of the dynamics internally and the external impact? What can the European Union do? It has played a role as a mediator in the internal crisis. What is your reading of that?
Exactly in this panel a couple of years ago, we were having this discussion, and one of the participants said, and this was the time when we had the first internal political crisis and some disagreements on regulations in the parliament, and at that time said that practically the challenges that Macedonia was facing was a self-fulfilling prophecy. That was the phrase. And it meant, in essence, that the experiment, which was the one performed on Macedonia for several years, meaning a country that is definitely anchored within Euro-Atlantic family on a long run, was kept without NATO membership since 2008 and blockade in Bucharest, and since 2009 without accession negotiations. That was the year when, for the first time, the European Commission recommended start of accession negotiations. So for how long can you keep a country which practically has its stability, prosperity, economic progress linked to membership in NATO and EU, outside of both clubs, without any kind of movement, because pretty much everything was linked to the name issue and the blockade that we have experienced at that time. Now, probably the most important item would be, well, one can say, whatever the external circumstances, you're the one that you're responsible for your internal political climate, for the type of relations that you're going to develop, for type of standards and reforms that you're going to conduct. Yes, for sure. This is how we reached the situation where NATO said that we are ready to enter, but we got blocked. And this is how we came to the position where the Commission has said we are ready to start accession negotiations. The answer to that probably lays within the institutions. So we will have our own responsibility, and some of these movements is happening. I mean, the Social Democrats opposition is back in Parliament today after being for 16 months outside of the Parliament. And this is one of the steps. Probably there will be several other things that will happen in the meantime, before the end of the year. But the question is, can we move forward unless there is a move in Brussels that will allow us to start accession negotiations?
Brussels and in Athens.
In Athens, probably even more.
On the NATO. So, and similar question to others from the region. I don't know whether the minister from Albania or from the foreign minister of Bosnia. I mean, Bosnia is considered like the most difficult case. We are 20 years after Dayton, 20 years after the end of the war, and what could unblock the situation, the domestic deadlock that you have, and what can international actors do? They have tried in various ways. And if I can allow something that is not too diplomatic, my colleague and friend Pierre Mirel, who was working for DG Enlargement and in charge of this region, was supposed to present at our institute the annual report about the progress report, as it is called. And when it came to Bosnia, he said, this report should have been called the non-progress report. So how do you respond to the non-progress report, considering that we are 20 years after the war, and how to get out of this deadlock?
Sometimes in Bosnia, some years were even good if you could say non-progress report, not going back. You know. Many of those 20 years we were going back. I mean, this is a good time to speak about this. 20 years after the war, 20 years after the Dayton Agreement. Some of the people here might have heard this before, but I will repeat it anyway. One of the rare things that you will hear in the same way in Sarajevo, in Banja Luka, where I come from, or in Mostar, is that people are not happy with the way they live, with their life standard. And they expected to live much better 20 years after the war. So this puts, at least I feel it, as a minister in the Council of Ministers of Bosnia and Herzegovina, some kind of a positive pressure on us to be accountable, to be responsible, and to produce some results, finally. First, before I say a few words on the situation now in Bosnia, first let me say that we are, because it's one of the headlines of the session, we are very much committed. It's one of our priorities to work every day on better relations with our neighbors and with other countries in the region. Just a few examples. We have signed the first agreement about borders with our neighbors in Montenegro. We expect to do the same very soon with Croatia and with Serbia. We had a very good meeting with leaderships of Bosnia and Herzegovina and Serbia. We are talking and working on common infrastructure, energy-related projects, also some diplomacy-related projects we are working together. We have signed with Albania, which is the first country that is not neighboring country, the agreement on easier traveling with just a biometric ID. We have proposed this to Macedonia as well, so we are working very strongly with our neighbors, with our friends in the region, on opening countries to each other and creating better atmosphere in order to push entire Western Balkans to European Union. This is one of our priorities. When it comes to Bosnia, we had 7 years, we have been blocked for 7 years. So it took 7 years for us to activate SAA after it was signed. Now we have the new approach by Europe. And you asked what can be done to help the countries in the region and Bosnia and Herzegovina. We don't need anything else except two things. One is political support, but not like it was in the history, like the one we have now, and also financial support for our infrastructural, energy-related projects that will help bring European idea closer to the people and that will help us have some projects, have some things that will be visible and that will be useful for most of the people living in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Let me just a few sentences and I'll finish the first round. So this is of the great importance for us to have this support, and this is something that I think is extremely important, needs to be said. Bosnia and Herzegovina maybe now for the first time has received the support for Bosnia and Herzegovina such as it is, with all its differences, with a clear role for Republika Srpska, for Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, for cantons, and a clear role of every level of governance in the reforms that need to happen. So if you ask me, it's just those two things. Political support and financial support for the projects that we have.
Yeah.
And the Vienna conference was a great sign of both for us, and I think it's the first time that it is clear that EU will not be complete until Western Balkans countries are there, and it's clear that this support will be there for all of the countries going on their way to the EU.
Okay, but many people in Bosnia feel that the road to the EU is somehow, if not blocked, at least delayed by the impossibility of the elites to agree and to overcome the deadlock. And that was a little bit my question. And that is the feeling of, if you look at the demonstration that took place last year in Bosnia, you had the feeling that the social question is back and the impatience with the stalemate of the elite is back. And therefore, EU maybe is not doing everything it could or has not in the past. I think there is also something for the political elites in the region. But to complete our starting point, the regional perspective, how do you see from Albanian perspective, where do you see the most difficult questions? Where are the main risks for things? Let's not congratulate ourselves for what things are going fine. Let's see where the problems are or where they could be, where the risks are.
Yes, I would still insist on starting with a positive note. That 2 decades after the end of the war, we see now sort of a momentum of political, economic and social integration in the region. Vienna conference being one example in case, but also in more generally Berlin process and Bordeaux process have both provided excellent platforms for political cooperation in the region. What we see today is that we have a new momentum of new synergies. 10 years ago, or more than a decade ago, in the pre-accession phase of this country and other countries of Eastern Europe, the word of, or the key phrase was Europeanization. How would these countries be Europeanized? How would Europeanization happen, whatever that means? Whereas today, for our countries, it is clear that Europeanization will never happen, even if accession will happen very soon, because of the economic insecurity in these countries, because of the very large gap, economic gap of these countries from existing member states. And in that respect, the concept which you hear mostly or most often today is connectivity, and that is with good reason. The connectivity agenda and the key infrastructure projects which were confirmed in Brussels this April and in Vienna last week, in a way offer a very good opportunity for our countries to connect with each other. And everyone who knows the history of our region knows how difficult it was and it remains so for our people to travel from one corner of the region to the other, for businesses to conduct business, for young people and students to go and meet their peers in another country, whereas it might be easier actually to go to another EU member state than within the region, and that despite the geographical proximity. The Berlin process, going back to the conference last week, in a way is not only about infrastructure and economy, but also for building trust. And as you mentioned, the Serbian Prime Minister Vučić and Albanian Prime Minister Rama, the amelioration or the improvement of bilateral relations between the two countries is an example which proves that this this regional cooperation is moving forward, and Berlin process has offered a good platform for building trust, but also in a way has given a signal of hope and a positive message to our people and citizens. Now, where we stand now at this point, we need to have more concrete sort of projects and investment priorities, or what we have been stressing in Vienna or elsewhere in other EU forums. We need a separate growth package. So that's where we differ perhaps from the Serbian friends and colleagues, that yes, we need EU money because of the economic insecurity in this region, which might spill onto other security threats or other areas, fragile, let's say, areas of our society. However, this process does not substitute accession, and that is what there is a consensus. We are all clear about it in the region. In a way, accession is the only sort of perspective which could boost not only domestic reform but also cooperation among ourselves. Perhaps Minister Mitov could confirm here some data that I was looking at from Bulgaria before and after accession. If we look at the number of young people who wanted to remain in the country before accession and young people who wanted to flee the country after accession, the difference is quite telling. It's very significant to actually demonstrate that membership has provided young people with a very tangible perspective. Maybe I'll leave it there, and I'll be very curious to hear other honorable.
We just wanted to see where the problems, where the issues are, and move gradually outwards. So let's see if from Bulgaria and Hungary, how does the perspective look? It has just, your country has just been mentioned about the population move which happened before and after EU accession. How do you see, what can be the role of countries from the region who are members of the EU? Because the assumption is that countries of the EU are necessarily vectors of integration. In the case of Greece, which is blocking Macedonia, it is not necessarily the case. So in what way can Balkan countries who are members of the EU contribute to that process?
Well, thank you, and I'd like to start with the following. So first, we probably need to refer a little bit to the wider context and look at what we are facing, not only as a region, but as European Union as a whole. It was mentioned already, and I fully agree that the European Union will never be complete without the Western Balkans in its Western Balkans inside the European Union. But when we take a look at the challenges we're facing, first we need to admit that history is back. The fact that liberal democracy had no alternatives in the past somehow, right now is challenged. Totalitarian regimes, competitive authoritarianisms, state capitalism and so on is growing and offering alternatives and putting pressure on all the in the whole region. The EU is still the only game in town, but we need to be aware of the risks and of the facts that non-European actors are trying to meddle, to say the least, right now in the region and somehow stall or impede the integration of the Western Balkans inside the European Union. And we need to be aware that This is also our responsibility, the countries in the region who are already members of the European Union. It's our responsibility to a great extent to work with our neighbors and to create the environment needed in order to deepen the integration. It means, first, when it comes to connectivity, it was already mentioned, transport, energy infrastructure. The Western Balkans, all the countries of the Western Balkans need to be essential part of the talks when it comes to the European Energy Union. Now with the migration pressure and with the risks created by the migration inflows, we are witnessing a very a situation in which it is clear that the countries of the Western Balkans need to be included in the common strategy of the European Union when it comes to tackling this very crucial in this very crucial moment the pressure we are facing.
When you say other players are now present, which ones do you in particular have in mind, and how do they affect the process?
Oh, of course, everyone here knows who I mind, and that's actually Russia, of course. Yeah. Through energy means and through, let's say, undermining the weaknesses, pointing out the weaknesses of the liberal democracy, and also trying to undermine the process via propaganda, not only and half-truths. The environment somehow, the public environment in some of the states of the Western Balkans could be, let's say, shaken in terms of the choice of the population, of the citizens of those countries. And of course, sometimes even the political elites might eventually be drawn or affected or even tempted to try other models. Let's say the so-called facade democracies or competitive authoritarianisms are a real threat. Simulation of a democratic process behind which something else is going on. And we can see those temptations very often. They existed in Bulgaria even at a certain point. And basically we needed to go through that with a lot of effort, a lot of political will. But here the responsibility of the political elites in the countries of the Western Balkans is huge. And of course the citizens of those countries to put pressure on their political elites.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much for bringing the question of democracies and alternatives to democracies. And of course, when we discuss the role of Hungary in the region, you have two things. One is precisely this question about democracy. Last year, Prime Minister Orbán launched this concept of illiberal democracy, that there is a different concept of democracy that he has in mind, besides the traditional liberal model. And that has, of course, could have echoes in the Balkans. And the second thing is, of course, related to the current refugee crisis and the fence that Hungary has been building during the summer. So I turn to you, Minister, how on those two issues, Hungary's reference as an alternative model of illiberal democracy for the Balkans, or, and secondly, what is the signal that you are sending to the Balkans with the fence that you have built?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you very much for this invitation and the possibility to highlight the position of the Hungarian government on such important issues. If you allow me, I just would like to say that I think both EU and NATO should be much quicker and braver when it comes to the integration, European integration and Euro-Atlantic integration of the Western Balkans. We are a neighboring country. We very well remember when there was a war in the neighborhood in the Western Balkans, and we have given shelter to tens of thousands of refugees coming from our neighboring countries. I think that the situation was fragile until recent times in Western Balkans, and I think that the best way towards stability is the way to the European and Euro-Atlantic integration. So I think that the accession talks and the integration processes should be accelerated. I don't really see why Montenegro and Macedonia has not received invitation to NATO yet. And I think that we should have started negotiations with Serbia much earlier as well. This is in parentheses. The second issue of democracy. Well, you know, Hungary has been under very, very serious critics and attacks on international politics and especially international media since 2010, when we have won the national elections by a 2/3 majority, which is, I understand, envied by some political forces in the European Union, having such a stable political background of one party and one party family. In regardless of the critics, in 2014 we have won another 2/3 majority. So it means that international attacks cannot really influence the will of the Hungarian people, and I think this is a very basic expectation of ours towards international politics, to respect the decision of the Hungarian people. Prime Minister in that speech has talked about that there are some issues in the field of economy which were said to be liberal, but for us it seems that time has overcome them. If you allow me, I just would tell you two examples. It was a liberal dogma that state is a bad owner. I studied it on university as well, of economy, that state is a bad owner. It was a liberal economic dogma. Now, according to Hungarian understanding, it's not true anymore. State can be a good owner as well, not necessarily bad, as private ownership can be good or bad, depending on the owner. The second is that a liberal dogma says that, for example, state has no role in job creation. We say it's not true anymore. There are certain areas, certain fields of economy where state can and should have a role in job creation, for example. We have totally restructured our tax system and unemployment aid system as well, and just to give you a short overview on that, unemployment aid period is only 3 months in Hungary, and afterwards everyone is going to be offered a public job, and if it is refused, then no more aid. So we think that such kind of not liberal economic solutions, which are against the old liberal dogmas, that you can call them illiberal or whatever, need to be put into consideration.
Economy. Of course, liberal economics, that's a different debate.
But he spoke about this. I just wanted to make sure.
Liberal democracy, that is the question of the rule of law, the separation
but it's
of powers.
not. The problem is that you have not read the speech, and those ones who are putting critics on the Hungarian Prime Minister did not read the speech either. He was not challenging the basic values of democracy. He was not challenging rule of law. He's a real Democrat. He has been in politics from 1990, and he has won 3 times. He has lost 3 times. He never left politics. People called him back, voted in favor or against him. He stayed in politics. So he totally accepts rule of law. He never challenged. He never challenged the basic values of democracy. May I just remind you that he was the leader of the anti-communist, one of the leaders of the anti-communist movement in Hungary, which then led to the fall of a communist dictatorship and was transferred into a democracy. So basic values of democracy was not challenged. What was challenged is that some economic solutions, which are said to be liberal by any case, are not working anymore, or there are more effective tools. Now, regarding migration, you know, situation is dramatic in Hungary without any exaggeration. Until this morning, from the beginning of this year, 156,000 irregular migrants entered Hungary, out of which 99.3% came through Serbia. Now the major railway station is occupied in Budapest. The situation is dramatic. We have asked the European Commission what we have to do. We have to comply with EU regulations or we do not. Because Schengen regulations say that it is responsibility of a member state to defend the Schengen border, the external border. And if you read the Schengen Codex as well, not only the speech of the Prime Minister, it says that you have to cross the Schengen border only on an official border crossing point in opening hours. And in order to force this, it is the responsibility of the member state. So what we have done, that we have closed the green border, because I don't think it's normal that through the green border, people would like to come into Hungary without documentation, breaking the law, because law says you can enter Hungary through a official border crossing station with your passport. So, if you are a refugee, of course, we will give you shelter. We have done so in the future. Now there are political refugees in Hungary as well, but we don't speak about them loudly because they are refugees. They were in danger in their homes. We have given them shelter, but we just don't announce it because it's not about that. We give shelter to refugees, but what we cannot do is to give shelter to economic migrants because we cannot bear that burden. 156,000 illegal migrants came into Hungary. This is a pressure what we cannot bear. We had to close the green border, and this is one of the ways you comply with the Schengen regulations. I wonder whether if we let those people come in without any hindrance into the Schengen zone, what would be the critics against us? Why Hungary doesn't comply with the EU regulations? Why Hungary doesn't protect its Schengen border? You know, we have studied a lot of other solutions. We have studied the solution of the fence between Bulgaria and Turkey. I have not really read any kind of critics. By the way, there should not be critics. We studied the example of the fence at Calais in France, from where we got some critics. We have studied the case of the Spanish cities in Morocco. We have studied the wall at the southern part of USA. I didn't really read any kind of critics about them.
So this is at least an opportunity for others maybe to respond to this question. How is the Balkan migration issue affecting your perception or your policies vis-à-vis the region? And particularly, is the Hungarian approach, which has just been described, the approach that you would support or recommend? I don't know who wants to, if the Mr. Roth wants to speak or and
yeah, first of all, let me say thank you to our Slovenian friends for their hospitality, and I have just three very simple messages. The first one is I would like to underline our clear commitment to an EU perspective to the Western Balkan states, to all Western Balkan states. And this is much more than a lip service. This is a wonderful panel, a big panel with distinguished colleagues, but what I miss is a representative of the European Union, because this is not a challenge for Germany or France or for Hungary or for Bulgaria. This is a common challenge and a common duty and obligation for all of us. And I would like to encourage our friends all over Europe, especially in Brussels, to strengthen the visibility in the Western Balkan states. And I'm very, very grateful to Commissioner Hahn, who was the mediator in order to implement an agreement for the governing parties and for the opposition in Macedonia. I'm very grateful to the High Representative Federica Mogherini. She was very, very active in order to go ahead in the relationship, in the difficult relationship between Serbia and Kosovo. These are very important signals for all of us. And my second message is we have to support and assist the Western Balkan states in the best way. And I fully agree with my colleagues. We have to deliver concrete measures on concrete projects. Just two examples. The first one is last year in Berlin, the first Western Balkan conference took place. And we sent we delivered three concrete projects, or offers for projects. The first one to improve the exchange of youth. The second one is the reconciliation process in the whole region, the bilateral contacts. And the third one is we have to improve the infrastructure, the transport infrastructure. The ordinary people in the Western Balkan states have to pay a very high price for serious and necessary structural reforms, for fiscal consolidation, and so on, and so on, and so on. And they have to see light at the end of the tunnel as soon as possible. The younger generation needs job and a concrete perspective. Thousands of younger people from the Western Balkan states, they come to Germany without any perspective. And my friend Edi Rama and others, they ask for support because they need the young generation to build up a better future in the Western Balkan states. Without the younger generation in this region, it won't work. And my third message is the Western Balkan states have to fulfill all the preconditions. I know this is a long and bumpy road, and I know that the European Union changed its strategy. The EU is much more than a single market and much more than a Eurozone. We are foremost a union of values. And it's very, very difficult to fulfill all these to bring these values into practice. Democracy, combating corruption, rule of law, freedom of media, independence of judiciary. This is very, very difficult. But without these concrete steps, it won't work. We learned our lessons within the European Union, but that's my main message. We will support and assist you. Germany is in driver's seat, together with many other friends, France, but the most important key player is the European Union. And I hope that there is a possibility to encourage the pro-European movement in the Western Balkan states, because we need pro-Europeans in the Balkan states, pro-Europeans in the European Union.
That's right. The pro-Europeans in the Balkans were sometimes taken too much for granted. If one looks at the opinion poll, I'm again referring to the Regional Cooperation Council survey, you see that the enthusiasm has not disappeared, but has come down. And of course, the kind of engagement that you have just outlined is a way of conveying the message that Europe remains engaged. Incidentally, to be fair to the Bled Forum organizers, Mr. Donald Tusk spoke yesterday at the opening of the forum. So European Union was present, even if not on this panel as such. Sorry? And Luxembourg presidency was there as well. So this is just to complete. I don't know whether on this European dimension, whether the Monsieur Harlem Désir, whether you want to come in?
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you to our Slovenian friends for the invitation to take part to this panel. First, I agree with those who say that the European Union will not be completed until the Balkans, Western Balkan country, will not be members of this political union and project. Second, there is a lot of challenges, and there is the economic one because of the economic fragmentation of the regions. There is the need of a lot of political reforms on the issues of rule of law, of governance. There is the issue of reconciliation. But there is also a lot of progress that was underlined because of the border Brani process and the role of Slovenia and Croatia. What has been done, even the recent result in Vienna of the discussion between Serbia and Kosovo, what was mentioned between Bosnia-Herzegovina and Montenegro on the border issues, the follow-up of the Berlin and Vienna process. There will be also a meeting in Paris next year on a very concrete project. There is a momentum, and that's the third point. I think that confronting, as we are, to new issues like the migration issue, we must ensure that we maintain this momentum of regional cooperation, of solidarity, solidarity among, of course, the Western Balkans and the Balkans country, but of European Union with the Balkan country. It's clear that Macedonia cannot face alone the influx of migrants. It's clear also that the answer, up to me, is not just 1 year after we just celebrate the 25th anniversary of the fall of the wall in Berlin and of the fence among Europe to build new walls and new fences. It's through the implementation of what we have decided together in the European Council and in the Minister of Interior Council. It's more support to the countries of the Mediterranean where migrants are arriving, the implementation of the hotspot policy so that we can welcome the refugee, do a distinction with the economic migrants, support the country where there is a lot of refugee arriving, having a share of the responsibility, acting together for cooperation with the country of origin, country of Africa, or the transit country like Turkey or like Niger, for example, and our common external action in Syria, in Libya, and so on. That's the way we will show to citizens that Europe is efficient. It's not by trying to just have a national answer, even if each country has to ensure a part of responsibility. And I want to say that I have a lot of admiration for Germany, for the people of Germany, the way they react in front of this very wide arrival of migrants and of refugees, the way the government and the Chancellor Merkel express the value of Europe in front of the populists. And I think this is something we must take in count, the fact that the citizens are able to understand a speech, an attitude of responsibility. But we must, of course, show that we will be able to handle this situation, to ensure the Schengen acquis, protecting our external border, but protecting also the freedom of movement and ensuring that we will answer by more cooperation. So now we have to ensure, as just Michael said, that all the decisions we have took in terms of increasing the investment in infrastructure, in connectivity, you mentioned energy, transportation, and so on, that this will be realized with the support of the Juncker plan, of the European Fund, with, of course, the private sector too, that we will put in place this youth project, very important, which is based on the experience of France and Germany, which is a part also of building a civil society and of contributing to reconciliation, and that we will face together this issue of migration.
That we have migrants coming between two EU countries, right? This is what the Serbian Prime Minister reminded us of yesterday. He said, they're coming from Greece, EU country, Schengen country, and they're moving to Hungary, another EU country. So you have this space, Balkan as a transit. And surely there is a case to be made that including the Balkans in the EU would make migration policy more coherent, more consistent, and easier to implement, certainly, than having this system. But I don't want to make virtue out of something that is really very dire and desperate situation. And it's a situation that concerns very much Turkey. It is often forgotten that the prime destination of that migration that goes through the Balkans is actually coming from your country.
Well, thank you very much. Actually, at the outset, again, I would like to thank our hosts for their gracious hospitality. And I fully agree with your initial assessment about the fragility that is predominant in the Balkans. And because when we look at the general situation, there's the overall system is prone to political upheavals and economic fluctuations, especially socioeconomic fluctuations. And it's not easy to be original after so many important speakers, but again, just for the sake of the record, I would like to emphasize that we need to put a lot of emphasis on bread and butter issues like employment, growth, trying to provide a more optimistic perspective to youth, and at the same time, sometimes look at the situation internally, because while we are talking about the migration problem, we seem to overlook one aspect. In the first quarter of 2015, the distinguished Minister of Hungary could correct me if I'm making a mistake here, there has been 32,810 asylum applications made to Hungary, and 70% of these asylum applications were originating from the Balkans, not from the crisis area that we are discussing. So this is one aspect. Now, we are facing with something more daunting. And here, while we are looking at this Balkans issue, I just want to state that we do not adhere to this definition of Western Balkans. Because if we are putting the emphasis on the Western Balkans, from that moment on we are making a mistake. Because Balkans ought to be taken into account in its entirety. And we have to have this inclusive approach. The minute we start making these artificial divisions, then we are really putting ourselves far from the target. And so that's why we would like to remind the panelists here and also beyond that we need to be more inclusive here. And secondly, of course, there are certain numbers uttered. I agree, I mean, 107,000 or 156,000 seems like an impressive figure, but with all due respect, this is an amount of people that we let in from Kobani in one night. And currently, Turkey is hosting over 2 million people, 2 million people from Syria and Iraq. And we have been saying that this is a serious issue from the inception of the Syrian crisis. And do you know how much time has left? 4 years, 5 months, 2 weeks, and 2 days. And we have been on record with our warning to our friends and allies. There has been speeches made by my ministers, former ministers, by our presidents and the prime ministers. Never seems to be heeded. Nobody takes account of what we are saying. And there's another problem which we need to be conscious of. That's the foreign terrorist fighters. And this is working both ways. It's not only there might be foreign terrorist fighters among these immigrants, but at the same time there would be foreign terrorist fighters which might be originating from the Balkans heading the other direction. And yes, of course there are possibilities for being optimistic. Energy is one aspect. And I would like to give credit to Hungary for the Tesla project. And at the same time, Turkey is very determined to get TANAP and TAP projects moving. So these are, of course, positive things and negative things combined. But again, I just would like to say that we need to have an all-inclusive approach. And I'm happy to see that now everybody's talking about burden sharing, finally, and nobody was talking about it until this migration problem started knocking on the doors of our European partners. Let's face it.
Very good point. If I can go back to your first point about the Western Balkans, I think this is an invention of EU talk. Yeah, there's the Balkans, and you can find appropriate labels. But when you say we need a more inclusive approach, take the region in its entirety, I understand you mean with Turkey, or at least that's one possible reading. Of course, that can work can be interpreted in different ways. If I can be slightly undiplomatic, I recall when then Prime Minister Erdogan visited Pristina, he was on a platform with the Kosovo Prime Minister and the Albanian Prime Minister, and he said, Kosovo is Turkey, Turkey is Kosovo. Well, that's a statement that you can imagine how it goes down well in the rest of Europe, or for that matter, elsewhere in the Balkans, in Belgrade to start with. So that's maybe one clarification about how inclusive should the Balkan notion be. And the second point, I think, is very important, what you mentioned about the foreign fighters and the jihadists who go via Turkey to fight in Syria or in Iraq. We have this problem now in the Balkans. We have jihadists coming from Bosnia, from Albania, from Kosovo, etc., just as we have jihadists coming from Western Europe as well. So this is this is a Balkan problem now and a European problem. And clearly there is now an interaction between what is happening in the Middle East, what is happening in the Balkans, and what's happening in Europe. And Turkey is kind of on the receiving end of both.
Most certainly, but before I address to that, I would like to go back to the comment you made about the statement of my president. First of all, we have this terrible inclination of engaging in selective quotation. And nobody has read the entire speech that was made by the president at the time. And I will give you a few numbers just to maybe lighten up. One is, first of all, we have 300,000 Albanian origin people in Kosovo who have connections of some sort to Turkey. And we have 2 Turkish parliamentarians in the Kosovo parliament and 1 Turkish origin minister. On top of that, we have over 400,000 people of Kosovo origin living in Turkey, and close to 1 million people of Albanian origin. And they are all connected. So he was trying to put the emphasis on this kind of a relationship. And unfortunately, some nationalist elements in Serbia took this particular phrase and then started reading too much into it. And when my prime minister, in one of the interviews, indicated that if one Serbian the politician would come out and say that Serbia is Turkey and Turkey is Serbia, he wouldn't have any quarrel with it. Or Istanbul is Belgrade, Belgrade is Istanbul. So this is the mentality which we need to work on. This is what I'm trying to say by having this interconnectivity, inclusiveness. So there's nothing offensive about it actually, but when you read too much into it, you can pull out whatever you want, naturally. Yeah. And about the foreign terrorist fighters, we have been warning again about this danger. And again, if I need to give figures, we have a list, no entry list of 18,000 people. And out of these 18,000 people, we have deported close to 2,000 people. And we have now monitoring stations in some of the important airports and bus stations. If we see someone suspicious, we interview them. And if we find them to be potentially dangerous, we send them back. But now what happens is that those people that we send them back take the next plane back to Turkey. Because when we send them back to the countries they originate, if they don't have any legal problems or any records, illegal records, they say, well, we cannot obstruct their freedom of travel. So we need to have more, I think, cooperation in how we should address this issue, because this is going to be growing and growing exponentially.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I don't know, this is an issue that maybe Mr. Yeo would like to react to, because this brings in, of course, broader international concerns about the interaction, what is happening, say, in the Middle East, in Europe's neighborhood, and in the Balkans. And of course, it's a concern to American foreign policy in general. So.
Well, finally, it's the hour of America, to quote a former Luxembourg Prime Minister talking about the Balkans. Very glad to have this opportunity to speak with all of you, and I want to congratulate all of the representatives on this panel for their contributions and those of their governments to Balkan stability. As an American, I think I have an advantage and a disadvantage. The advantage is, of course, if I say something stupid, it won't be a surprise if I'm talking about Europe. And if I say something clever, it will be a pleasant surprise. So what I want to say about your question, Ms. Rupnik, and in response to some of the very interesting insights from my fellow panelists, is that I think we have a lot to congratulate yourselves about in terms of progress. Even in the last year, there has been significant progress, whether it's in Kosovo and Serbia, whether it's the agenda for reform in Bosnia and Herzegovina. But I think we also have a lot more work to do. So just in a very few short words, I'll summarize, and you'll cut me off at some point when I run out of time. But the first point I make is that there needs to be less talk and more action. Secondly, we all need to be aware of the fact that we can either lead change, or we will be changed ourselves. And thirdly, the third point, and this is the one I want to stress, is that values and principles still matter, or they should matter. I mean, on the first point, less talk. This will be a difficult principle to stand by in my own intervention, but I think what we are painfully aware of is that there needs to be more integration, that accession, both in the European Union and in NATO, for those countries that aspire to NATO, is an important goal and one that we all support. But we tend to, looking back over the last year, in looking at our accomplishments, your accomplishments, see mostly words, mostly paper, mostly agreements in writing, which our good friends in the Balkans have proven to be extremely adept at achieving. And I don't mean this as a criticism. It's difficult to reach any kind of agreement. So I think even an agreement in writing, which has not yet been implemented, is better than no agreement at all. But it's time to implement. And the point of more action, I think, is that there has to be implementation of what has been agreed. Not just what's been agreed this year, whether it's Kosovo, Serbia, or whether it's in Bosnia and Herzegovina, or whether it's in Macedonia, but what has been agreed over the past years and what needs to be done. The reforms are not secrets. There's nothing mysterious about what needs to be done. These are reforms that are universal in terms of what needs to be done. But we, in the international community, the countries in the Western Balkans themselves, need to get down to work and actually implement these reforms. Easier said than done, I know, but I think in looking back over the last years, where we have not been as successful as we need to be, is to including the sense of urgency, that what we're dealing with in the Balkans is not a theoretical, abstract problem to be solved in a classroom. It is a real existential challenge. There are real instabilities that are immediate, not in the future, again, not theoretical. And if we don't deal with them now, we'll be dealing with more difficult problems in the near future. Secondly, on change or be changed. And this gets to the second question you asked earlier in your introduction, Mr. Rupnik, about the international context. What has changed in the last year or so about the international context? I would argue that on the theme of making progress, and we all, I think, agree, we have made progress, the progress in the vectors of integration that you mentioned, there is a certain pace, but that pace is far exceeded by the vectors of disintegration and instability in the Western Balkans. So while we are making progress on paper, there are phenomena in reality that are moving faster, even faster than this pace of integration. I'm talking about foreign fighters, I'm talking about terrorism, I'm talking about energy insecurity, I'm talking about corruption, I'm talking about brain drain. All of these challenges, which our friends in the Balkans know much better than I, are moving at an exponentially faster pace than we are in terms of implementing the reforms and helping our friends implement reforms. So we must move faster. We must take into account that the international reality, the context in which we're working beyond the region, is not standing still while we get our act together. It's moving forward. And It's not affecting just the external peripheries. It's affecting the Balkans themselves. And that affects all of us. And thirdly, values matter. We've talked a lot about the processes, the Berlin, the Berto-Brioni process, the Berlin process, the Juncker plan, accession process. It reminds me of a very provocative quote, and of course, it's not an American I'm going to quote, it's the Pope who said, and I'm going to mangle this paraphrase, but essentially he said, and it was an address to the European Parliament, I think last year, when he said that when we visit Europe, we have the impression of weariness and aging, and that the place that used to be the source of great ideas has been replaced by bureaucratic processes. He could have easily said the same about America. I fully admit that. We, I believe, have lost sight in the Western Balkans and beyond in the values and principles that we have many times committed ourselves to defending and pursuing. Not only accession, but beyond that. Basic principles such as inviolability of borders, maybe not necessarily in the Balkans, but not very far beyond the Balkans where we see that principle has been violated. In the anniversary, 20th anniversary of the Helsinki Final Act. Basic values about the protection of human rights, whether it's migrants or refugees or asylum seekers. Those values are drowned out by the chorus of criticism we hear from European leaders about the dangers posed by these individuals. I'm not minimizing the challenges and the risks and political problems that migration poses. And we not only sympathize with our European partners, we are actively assisting to the extent we can in sharing our experiences and best practices and in consulting with the Europeans on how to address migration. But we should not lose sight of what we stand for. That's important not only for addressing the immediate challenge, but giving hope to the future generations in the region about what we stand for and what we're willing to do to bring them into the same family of European countries that all of you are now enjoying. So I'll conclude by saying that, again, we have together achieved a lot. And I would agree that the European Union must be recognized for what it has done. It is an important symbol and attraction for the region. We work very closely in the United States in supporting what the European Union is trying to do. But I think what we all need to do even more of is in redoubling our efforts to increase, to accelerate the pace of what we've achieved so far so that we don't fall too far behind these vectors of disintegration. And we continue to give hope to the future generations who are in need of knowing that we still continue to be committed to a Europe whole, free, and at peace.
Yeah. Well, thanks for stressing the acceleration. I think most panelists would agree, at least those from the Balkans would agree on the acceleration emphasis. And most Europeans, EU would say, well, the whole EU process may be looking mundane and bureaucratic, but at the end of the day, the whole engagement in the Balkans, since Bosnia, Kosovo, etc., this was about values. At the end of the day, that is the only thing that will sustain the process. If it was just economic calculation, that would not sustain the process. So I don't know whether the minister agrees. Or let me turn, because this is our host, and I know and next after that I'll give the floor to Mr. Roth. But the one who hasn't spoken yet is our Slovene host,
I will try to be as brief as possible because
yes.
you know Slovenes, we could talk about our neighbors and
yes,
this region for a long, but I will just.
And you don't have a plane to catch, unlike our German.
I don't have a plane to catch, but we must. I think we should leave also some comments to the audience, maybe, or some questions.
Yes.
You were mentioned the decreasing enthusiasm in the Balkan countries or states about we are talking today. I think the enthusiasm will come back as soon they will feel that we are delivering and that European Union and NATO, let's not forget NATO, are actively present and have a very creative approach. So I would just like to point out 6 very important points. How do we see the enrollment? But I will not explain. I will just say about this enthusiasm. Will come back when we'll see an active approach of EU, creative EU, connectivity, some of you mentioned before, which is very important, which will bring us to a connection between EU, the region in terms of infrastructure, energy, economy, and so on and so forth. Young people here, we are very active. Then strategic communication to the citizens of the region, because they must know what are our goals. And sometimes we have the impression that they are not well informed. I'm talking now about EU as a whole, not only Slovenia or Germany. And then to conclude, we need open doors to NATO, starting, for example, with Montenegro, and joint action to prevent what was also mentioned here, negative influences from today an unhappy world and from the surroundings, like foreign fighters. We even have got some from Slovenia, and migrations and other, there is lack of employment, there is lack of perspective for young people, and so on and so forth. So we need joint action, all of us, and as my predecessor said, I think also I'm a United States friend, really a common action, very, very, very quickly. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. That was very concise, just what the doctor ordered, and I would be normally tempted to open to questions from the audience, but I know that the minister will have to leave early, and he has a plane to catch, unlike our Slovene host, and maybe he wants to respond to some of the things he's heard, and maybe also, this would be sort of my own additional question, Germany has played recently a role in sort of re-energizing the process. We've seen last week in Vienna, I was in Vienna for the Civil Society Forum. I think this was a very good initiative as well, that civil society is part of this European integration process. Next year in Paris, there should be a follow. How to, coming from the re-energizing that you took part in, turn it into a whole European endeavor?
Thank you. The Blatt Strategic Forum is well known as a place for frank and open discussions. And I fully agree with you. We should accelerate the whole process. But I would like to underline one real problem. The problem is that for many citizens in the European Union, or within our citizenship, many reservations and doubts exist about a further enlargement process, especially in my country, but not just in Germany, in other countries too. That's why I would like to encourage all of us to come in touch with our citizenship, to explain the ordinary people at the street the benefits from a further enlargement step. And that's very difficult because all of us are under pressure by populists, by anti-Europeans, and that makes it not easier. But I fully agree with our colleague from Turkey. We have serious problems outside the European Union. We have to face many, many crises. And there's just one answer to solve it. A common answer and a European one in a close cooperation with our friends, with the Americans and with other allies all over the world. But without the public support in our citizenship, it won't work. And that's why I'm so grateful to your question, because it underlines that we have to invite the citizenship, the NGOs, civil society, to become part of the whole negotiation process. If just technocrats from Brussels come together with the technocrats from the capital, from the national capitals in Western Balkan states, to negotiate about details and the chapters, one after another, that's not enough. We need the support of the citizenship, and we have to clarify to our citizenship in Germany or in France or wherever that the enlargement process is in our common interest. That's very important. And my second point to the migration issue, and I'm sure you will come back, I see the problems in the Western Balkan states, and that's my promise to you. You don't stand alone. We will help you with technical, with logistic, and with financial support. That's my promise to you. But the precondition is that our common values within the European Union are respected. Without humanity and solidarity, it won't work. And our problem is that my friends and partners explain solidarity as a project of national interest. That's not enough. And thank you, Alain, because you said it much better than I do. I was born 500 meters far away from the former border to the GDR. I was born there, I went to school, I made my school exams. And I live there. And a European Union with new walls and fences is not a forward-looking concept. And if I criticize new fences and walls, then I have to give an answer. And my answer is we will support our friends in other countries, but please, we should come back to the roots of the European integration process and the free movement of labor and open society, inclusive societies. This is the best thing we have on the global stage, and we should defend it. That's my wish to all of us and to myself.
Okay, well, I think you have the support certainly in this audience, and I think all the panelists. I know you will have to leave us on the dot at 5:30. I was told by your assistant. Other panelists may be able to stay a bit longer, and our organizers will accept a little bit going over time. And maybe we can now open, if we can, to the questions from the audience. Or, unless there is, before that, unless there is an urgent will by somebody to respond to what has been said.
I have a few comments, but if there is a question, we can go first with the question. Yeah, no problem.
All right. And is it something really short? Yeah. So we have one short response to what has been said. Is that it?
Yeah, but if there is a question.
Okay. Is there a question? Yeah.
Through you, can I ask a question to my German colleague, because he made a very succinct point about enlargement. And when you say enlargement, does that encompass Turkey as well? Because if that's a promise from you, that's a very important promise.
Last week, my colleague Volkan Bozkır, or 2 weeks ago, the Minister for EU Affairs from Turkey, visited me in Berlin. And I made it very, very clear that the EU perspective of Turkey is in our common interest. And I'm in a very close contact with my partners within the European Union to open new chapters. And there's one chapter of crucial importance, chapter 23 and chapter 24. Let's talk about democracy, rule of law, independence of judiciary, and the right of the civil society and human rights. That would be great. And I will never forget when I met President Erdogan, but 2 years ago he was the Prime Minister, and he told me, please open the chapters. Let's do it, but you know quite well, that there is one problem. I have to convince all colleagues within the European Union and the Council of Ministers, and there are some reservations. And the best would be if Turkey sent clear messages to us. We act on basis of common European values. We respect it, and we do our very best to implement it. That would be a clear signal we need to convince all my partners within the European Union that we have to open new chapters for a new chance to cooperate in a much better way, because we need Turkey as a close ally and a close partner in order to find sustainable solutions on the global stage.
Thank you very much for that. And I just would like to say that we are ready to open all the chapters. And by the way, France has removed some of its political vetoes on them. We've heard that from President Hollande during his visit. And not only chapter 23 and 24, but I think there are some other relevant chapters. Chapter 31 on common security, because we have been talking about security here. It's part of the migration problem. And then the other one is chapter 15 on energy, which is again a very relevant issue. And that needs to be in the pipeline. And then chapter 17, which comes with the economic implications. Thank you.
Well, this is very interesting. Whatever the outcome at the European level, for enlargement, and for enlargement to Turkey even more than to the Balkans, you will need public opinion. Sure. And that will be a very difficult one. And well, we can start here at this forum, and perhaps questions are now welcome if there are no rejoinders from the panelists. Yes. Do we have a microphone? Maybe you can stand at this mic here. And if you can introduce yourself.
Yes, Hasan Aygün. I'm political advisor at NATO headquarters, and we are responsible for all the Balkans. And first, I would like to thank Slovenian panelists for not forgetting NATO. And I would like to thank the Hungarian minister for his remarks about NATO membership. But I have to highlight those two nations you mentioned. First, Macedonia and Serbia. Macedonia, FYROM, is going through the process. You know how it works. Application, the standardization process, and approval by North Atlantic Council. And NATO is a sum of 28 countries, and when it comes to decision, we need consensus, and one nation, as you know, is not ready for it. When it comes to Serbia, it's a different story, because Serbia has never applied for a membership. No, they haven't applied, and they have publicly said at the highest level that they are not interested in membership for the time being. We know the sensitivities of what happened 15 years ago, so we understand it. But Serbia is part of the Partnership for Peace program. We have several projects continuing together. We have liaison office in Belgrade. And as you said, membership of all these nations of Balkans in NATO will enhance the stability in those countries. Next step is Montenegro. Probably by the end of the year, Montenegro will be invited to become a member. And I hope one day we will have Macedonia or FYROM and Serbia as members. Thank you.
Thank you for this. But you know very well that the main obstacle to Macedonia joining, the minister will not disagree with me, 2008, there was a Bucharest summit, and there came a very clear and simple veto. And so long as this does not overcome, and that can be only overcome if United States, if NATO, if other Europeans are able to tell Greece that blocking Macedonia is a counterproductive thing, and that the sooner we get out of this deadlock will be the better for everybody.
Can I react as well?
Yes, yes. So the two of you, the first, which one was first?
Member States first.
Oh, no, we don't work like that in the Balkans.
Just a quick intervention. This is probably the first time that non-member state has an advantage of being ahead of a member state. But I was listening very carefully to what our European partners were mentioning, and I think that there is space to be seriously encouraged. seriously encouraged because of several messages that were pretty clear and were repeated by Germany, by France, by United States, I think pretty Bulgaria also, not to forget any of the other member states. And this was solidarity, it was values, and it was action, and action fast. However, we have a case which violates pretty much every single one of these principles. When we talk about solidarity, it was very easy to gather around solidarity principle when in 2009 European Commission for the first time said Macedonia is ready to start accession negotiations. The answer we got from the Council was, listen guys, you might be ready, Commission has assessed that, but there is a solidarity principle in the European Union, and that solidarity principle means that one of the member states says you shouldn't start accession negotiations. Based on that principle, go and look at the other side of the door, and we are still in the 6 years later. We got these recommendations. God knows what will happen this year. Probably there will be additional pressure on that side. But this is how solidarity works. When you call about solidarity, and the message was clear that solidarity is not a national interest only. Actually, in our case, it was pretty much different. And when you call about solidarity, when you face 150,000 migrants coming to your border, it happens sometimes that they're coming from an EU border into a non-EU member state. It just happens. And without any allocation of guilt, because this is a common problem, and I will subscribe to the point that if there isn't a European answer, there is no national answer. Not even Macedonia, in Hungary, in Germany, France, none of the countries, including Turkey, would be able to answer on its own. But there is solidarity, and there is solidarity. Then there is values. The gentleman had to, I guess, because he's coming from NATO, to mention FIREM, which is an illegal acronym that is used somehow. But this goes along the lines of value. It is linked to the fact that I need to wear a designation which has former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, or many of us are here coming from former Yugoslavia, but no one has a sticker on his head saying what his former denomination used to be. How humiliating that is for someone that is coming from a country that has been born in Macedonia, has been told that he's Macedonian, and has been speaking Macedonian language. Now, he needs to wear a sticker which says that you're a former something. Fair enough, this was accepted, and the price for that was that we are not going to be blocked in NATO and EU. Both have happened. And then we came back again to values. We said rule of law. I would be very happy if we can start accession negotiations on the rule of law package, meaning chapters 23 and 24, and then we get killed by technocrats or NGOs or politicians from member states telling us what we should improve in our system. But one of those basic values is that we should respect the rule of law. And in the case of NATO accession, after 2008, we have filed a court case in front of International Court of Justice. There was a clear decision that it was illegal based on international law principles and the interim agreement to block Macedonia. Well, again, there was a solidarity principle. So I'm just mentioning that because I would fully agree with the German assessment that the most important handicap that we need to handle now is taxpayers' view or citizens' view, or how difficult it is to sell the European story to European taxpayers. I wouldn't be able to go in front of an average French or German taxpayer and go and convince him, as a matter of fact, even Slovenian, to tell him, you know what, you just continue with the enlargement, everything is going to be settled in the European Union. That's not priority, let's face it. Now, Americans have very blunt and I would say open manner in putting things that are not working very well and that we need to address. And number one probably is action. As Hoyt has mentioned, this is what is missing. We got used that for 7 years we can be blocked in NATO. Well, do you care? Not necessarily. You can do 16 maps. No other country has made 16 maps. These are the annual cycles that you do. Practically there isn't a single reform that we haven't performed several times. And I guess that they keep us there because we are such a good candidate, no one wants to lose us as a candidate. But Macedonian taxpayers, and I think that probably Bosnians and Albanians that are present here and are outside the club have no doubts about Kosovars and Serbs, will say our taxpayers have some expectations. This is not that we're going to jump into the European Union tomorrow. The road is going to be painful and we're going to need to work with our European partners to convince them it's a good idea. But We need to change the approach of having solidarity, value, etc. as a cherry-picking approach. I think that will help our taxpayers in order not to see the drops that we've seen in some of the surveys that RCC or others have been performing. Thank you.
Very good. Minister?
Thank you very much. Maybe I was misunderstood a little bit because I mentioned Serbia in the context of European Union, that European Union should have started accession negotiations or talks generally earlier, with Serbia. What you touched upon, the membership of Macedonia and Montenegro, I think there was two words which I didn't really like. One was FYROM as well. We made the decision in the Hungarian government that we call Macedonia because that's the name of the country. So simple. And the second, that you have said Montenegro will be probably invited. And that's my problem. Probably. Why probably? I think it's very unfair towards Montenegro to set over 50% public support as a precondition of the invitation. Because I do remember very well the approach of the Hungarian citizens towards European Union, when it was said year by year that EU membership is 5 years away, and the next year it was said that EU membership is only 5 years away, and the next year it was the same, then you should have looked at the public support going down. So the same with Montenegro and Macedonia. They are always said that, okay, we are just about to start the negotiations. Of course, there won't be a public support over 50%, but whenever there will be an invitation, you can be sure that public support will rise. So I think that we must not set public support over 50% as a precondition of the invitation, because it's just simply not fair.
We may have time for one more question if there is in the audience a desire to raise an issue.
Perhaps one last comment.
One last, yes.
Just to clarify very briefly, when I was talking about the need for more action, less talk, and faster progress on the processes we've been talking about, I didn't mean to put all the burden on the European Union. In fact, the burden is really on the aspiring countries. And I don't think this will come as a surprise to any of the aspirants. The real work needs to be done in the countries which are candidates or aspirants. That is in the reform process. And I know Minister Poposki understands that, for example, in the area of implementation and action, we now have an agreement, thanks to the government in Macedonia and the opposition, in a way forward in resolving the political crisis. Now it's time to implement. So the burden and the responsibility is on all of us, international community as well as the aspirants. The work needs to be done. What I would say is that for many of us, international community members, what is at least as important as the accession itself, the membership status itself, is the reforms that the countries achieve in reaching that status. It was true for NATO membership. Many of the countries that came in the 90s had to make painful, difficult sacrifices to join NATO. As for the European Union, it was that process of transformation that was, in our view, at least as important as the actual attainment of the membership status. So I want to emphasize the work has to be done on both sides, especially for the aspirants. Secondly, on Montenegro, I think everyone knows the United States is a very strong supporter of Montenegro's aspirations to join NATO. But to answer the Hungarian minister's question about why Montenegro has not been invited yet, the simple answer is there's not yet a consensus of the 28 allies, and there has to be consensus before there's an invitation. And while personally I share the NATO international staff members' hope that Montenegro will be invited, it depends on Montenegro. Our commitment to Montenegro was to make a decision on whether to invite Montenegro by the end of the year. I'm talking about the allies, Hungary and other allies. We have told Montenegro we expect to see improvements in several areas, including public support. We have not declared a percentage threshold, and in the rule of law. And we believe if Montenegro continues on its path, if it continues working on reforms that it has been working on now for some years, that it has a good opportunity. And we'll stand by our commitment to do everything possible to help Montenegro get there. But there has to be consensus.
Thanks very much. A quick word from the Bulgarian Foreign Minister.
very quickly, as much as I agree with all our colleagues, and this was a really good conversation. We very much, and I started with this at a certain point when I was trying to address the issue of the dropping enthusiasm in some of the countries in the Western Balkans. Very often we're too hard on ourselves, criticizing ourselves as European Union, and especially when it comes to the procedures. A lot of half-truths are in those very small details. And we have to say the following. Yes, we are a community of values. The values, in order to be implemented, they need procedures. The European Union is a very complex, unique structure, which without those procedures will not be able to function. If we need to decrease those procedures, we need more political integration within the European Union, and I am one of the biggest supporters you can find of that. But whether we are ready or not, it is another question. But the procedures are needed. They are there in order to achieve the implementation of the values. And I completely agree here with Hoyt when it comes to where is the responsibility. Yes, it is with us, the countries in the region, members of the European Union, but a great deal of the responsibility of the integration of the Western Balkans is the implementation of all those procedures and values when it comes to the political elites in those countries. And we will do anything and everything possible in order to help them. And here the regional formats like SEECP, RCC are extremely important to be strengthened and to be used because they use the instruments of the European integration.
Thanks very much. A quick word from the Bosnian minister.
Two short points for me, very important. I'm sorry the German colleague left because he inspired me for both. But Hoyt helped with his comment a second ago. It's very important to know that burden is on ourselves, first of all. And especially after the messages we received recently, we received in Vienna. It's more for us than for anything else to have better economic situation, to have better salaries, to have more jobs, more investments, or to fight corruption, which is a big problem, maybe the biggest in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So it is clear that it's up to us. I can see the situation in Bosnia. We did have activation of SAA. We did have initial reform program passed. We did have mechanism of coordination, which is very important because of our very complicated structure. Just one step from this. So we now need to go from this manifestation or declaration phase into the practice. Now we need to deliver the laws, the legislation need to be passed through governments, through parliaments, and to go on. And just one more sentence, please. Very important thing that was mentioned on the public support. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, I think some of my colleagues might share this. We need more work on making this European integration process irreversible. We need to have this European spirit inside Bosnia and Herzegovina more stronger, and we need also support from our European friends. Just one example I'll give you. We had a certain blow to our European spirit efforts in Bosnia with the latest blocking of our milk products export, which seems to be, a very not so important issue. But for us it's important because we had very high standards to meet. We invested a lot of time, a lot of money into this, and now when it was all reached, when we got the confirmation that it was reached, we were blocked on the very last day it needed to go out. So my appeal is even today, not to help us on this, but to help us also in general to have this European spirit in Bosnia around the country, definitely there. Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much. I like the idea that we know what is to be done. All we need is to get it through Parliament. This is just a small snag in Bosnia. Just do it is the motto for Bosnia and I suppose for the Balkans. Before we conclude, last year was a Berlin summit. This year, a week ago, we were in in Vienna. Next year is in Paris. So I'm talking to the French Minister for European Affairs, who I must say has always been engaged with those issues, always showed interest in them. How do you take that role after Berlin, after Vienna? What can be done about conveying that message, what we were talking about, to our public opinions, which, as has been said, are, to put it mildly, skeptical or prudent?
It will not be an easy task. It was not easy in Berlin, in Vienna. There's many challenges for our public opinion, both in European Union, but also in the Western Balkan country. I agree with what was said by Mr. Yee about the sense of urgency. So Paris will be about delivering on both sides. We need to have a concretization of the commitments regarding reforms in Western Balkans country. We need also to deliver regarding investment and support from European Union, and the fact to unblock some of the process by opening chapter, by opening negotiation when it's not really open. So what are we facing? It's the fact that Europe has to deal with its place in history. If you look at the challenge of security, not only the Western Balkans, situation in Ukraine, situation in the Middle East, and the effect, direct effect it has on us now. What happens in Syria, in Iraq, what happens now in the Mediterranean, in Libya, but also if you look at Western Balkans. So it's a necessity, the fact to fulfill this accession to European Union. It's a challenge, obviously it's very difficult, but we have to transform it in an enthusiastic project for the citizen, not the taxpayer, I would say the citizen of Western Balkan countries. And of course, if negotiations are just blocked because of a name issue or things like that, after a time, there is no hope. It's the same in Bosnia and Herzegovina. There is a constitutional problem, but I think the new approach is good because we need to keep the movement and the dynamic. And also, of course, in the EU member state, we need to convince the citizen that it is a necessity for us, for security, for to solve issues like migration or fighting terrorism, but it is also a very beautiful project. You know, that those countries who were at war 20 years ago, 25 years ago, who have engaged in a process of reconciliation, who have this European perspective, can become members of this family with their diversity, with their history, with their link with the European history for centuries. So I think we have to transform it in something citizens will support because it's a necessity, but because also it is something which is coherent, consistent with our political project and with the value of European Union. That's the challenge, one of the challenges from now to Paris and for the conference in Paris. Thank you.
So that's a challenge for Paris next year. I reassure you immediately, I will not try to summarize or draw conclusions. You have seen that to have a panel with 12 participants is not an obvious undertaking, but I think we had an interesting exchange, an interesting discussion, and I want to thank all the panelists. The remaining, some of them had to leave, and I think we can give a round of applause to them.